Welcome back. This is class number 10, and today what I'm going to do is actually start by looking at this EXR sequence that we had. And when we left off, I wasn't sure what the status was, but it seems that actually one of the best teachable moments has actually come about because we don't have access to getting the correct texture and all that. So what we're left to do here is make the best of a current situation. And honestly, this is something that is kind of fortuitous in the sense that here we have to figure out how to make this CG work in context with the other CG. So let's go ahead and get started by rebuilding the beauty and see what we can do. And so what I'm going to do here is, here, let's just add a layer contact sheet off to the side, and we can view what we currently have. So I'll show the layer names and pull this up. So currently, and some of these layer names are a little long, so they kind of run into each other, but currently, looking at all these passes here, what I realize is we don't have an indirect pass. So to rebuild the beauty, what we want to do is, what I said previously was adding the diffuse, the indirect, the spec, and the reflection. And sometimes there's going to be other passes that you're going to add together. This is barring the AO pass and like a shadow pass where you would actually multiply those. But that being said, let's see what we can do to make this work. And so since we don't have an indirect, what I would do is add the ones that we do have. So the first thing I'm going to do is, we'll add a shuffle. And you know what? I think actually instead of burning a bunch of time building these, you've already seen this process. So what I'm going to do is just quickly set up the basic comp or the basic beauty build, and we'll just go from there. So I'll be right back. Okay, so here I've just set up the basic beauty, and currently we're looking at the beauty pass from the raw EXR. And then if I go to buffer number 2 here, where it's labeled reflection, you'll see that I've added the specular and the reflection along with the diffuse. So when I toggle between the two, there is no difference, no discernible difference that I can see. So this would be our beauty build from here. So now that we have that, one of the things that I was starting to do is look at some of these other passes. So one of the things that I realized is in looking at these passes is there's this refraction MA pass here. And I realized that we could possibly use that to substitute for the missing reflection data that we had in the previous EXR. So let's go ahead and add that to our stream here and take a look. So one more time, we'll add a shuffle. And let me go in here and bring this down. Take this and copy this, just for ease of use, and we'll branch this off. Now, if we pull this up and grab the refraction MA, this one here, now let's go ahead and add this down the line. And actually what I'll also do is copy this here and paste here. So now we have this here. So let's take a look at what we have. So immediately you can see right away that this is a little blown out, but we can take this down and it starts to feel much more like what we had in the previous EXR build. So here, if we compare against this, and this is a perfect time to do a wipe between the two, we can start to make this feel a little bit more like the other one did. So something like this. And of course, now if we just grade this and color correct it, so we'll just add a grade here. And it seems that this is a little bit more purple on this side, so why don't we go ahead and do that. We can make it feel a little bit more like it did previously. So go in here, and actually I'd say a little bit more blue in there. Yeah, something like this, and maybe take the gain down slightly. Now we're starting to feel pretty darn close to what we had previously. So obviously our spec pass here is a little heavy-handed, so we can take that down considerably. So let's go ahead and take that down. Something like this. Now we're starting to feel much more like what we had previously, and maybe it's still a little hot on all of this, so we can start to add some color corrections. So with this being said, instead of once again burning up all this time on the video, I'm going to go and start tweaking these and then explain what I've done through the process. So I'll be back in 2 seconds. So here we have, if you notice the difference between the two, these are pretty similar. The only thing I did was just simply grade down the diffuse slightly. So now we're getting to a point where the beauty and our rebuilt beauty are looking pretty similar. So this is a good place to start, where we can start to change some of the start changing some of this to make it feel like what we had originally in the first class, where we started to rebuild or actually the second class rather, where we started to rebuild the beauty and color correct them to make them feel like they were sitting in better. So with this being said, let me just talk about a couple of things. So the first thing that I can tell you that we can see right away is this spec pass here is definitely more present in our new render versus the old one. And then the other major thing that I can see, which could be an issue, but it's also going to give us an opportunity to explore a new technique, is this kick on the screen left side of the old render. So you can see right away that we have this lighting kick along here. So what we'll do towards the end here is something called the relight node. We'll go ahead and start working with this and try to make it what we can and go from there. So I think the next thing that I want to do before we continue down this road is we'll just go ahead and add a switch and compare, like we did previously. We'll just compare our original beauty with the current build that we have here. So we'll just put this into buffer or 1 or 0, and then the new build we'll put into 1. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and take a look at the output. I'm going to go ahead and go here so we can now see our output. So this is what we started with, and now if we bring this in, let's see what we have. And previously in the last class, one of the things that I had discussed was the backwards and forwards vector blurs, and that was basically a time-saving method. If you noticed how long it took to draw that now, if I take this to backwards, things should draw a lot faster. So this is where I was talking about using this as a preview method. So we can keep the vector blur still active without without having to wait for it to calculate all the final stuff in the forward version or forward method of calculating the motion blur. So now if we switch this, we should see a difference. And actually the reason why we're not seeing the difference is due to the alpha channel. So that's one of the things we need to fix. So let's go and take a look at this. Oh, and actually another thing that we need to do is put this in the right pipe. So I should step over here and show you another thing that I did earlier in the last class, and I don't think I explained it, which is if you look at the beauty, we had this node here which was right away being used for the alpha channel, because if you look at the alpha channel here, you'll see that this is actually not really what we want. We want a solid alpha for the wings so we can control all the various elements inside. With it like this, of course, it's actually going to affect that in a way that's not helpful to us. So if you actually look at the alpha channel here, this is exactly what we want for those wings. Now, why is it that we're getting that weird output in our when we comp the ferry over? And the reason why is because we've actually done this build, and how I got the alpha channel is by taking the RGB and A from this beauty pass, this beauty no reflection, I think it is, or beauty cam here. And actually what we want to do is take the RGB from the RGB and then just the alpha from that pass. So now if we switch these over, we should have a render that looks, or a preview that looks much more like what we were planning on seeing. So now that we've done that, let's move to the next step, which is actually grading our passes together to make them feel much more like what we had previously when we did this from this here. So if we went back and looked at what we originally had, whoa, this is missing depth. Okay, let's see. And actually just looking at this, our motion blur and Z defocus that we put together in the previous class, we're using passes that we piped in from our scanline render node, which are named differently. So if I turn these off, now we can actually see the difference between the two. So this is what we had done previously with our color corrected passes, and this is where we're at, which was what much closer to what the original beauty looked like. So we can see right away that we want to try to get this to look like this. So in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and set something up and come back, and then we can go from there. Okay, this is where I feel is a good place to carry on. So I just copied the black levels from the original pass that we had before, and then the next thing I did was desaturate the green from the wings before. So if we look at what we had, this is very similar to what we had done in class number 8. And then if we go down here, I started to grade all of this to more of a green look, which is what we had done also in class number 8. Now, if we look at the comp, the rough comp here of the ferry over the background, this is a moment where I thought this is what we need to do is kind of adjust this kind of fire or flame pattern that's in the wings. And here it's a little heavy-handed. And previously we had mats to do that, but we don't have those in this case. So this is where I realized we can look through some of the other passes we have on this layer contact sheet. And if we go here, let's see, do we have this in one of the buffers? No. Okay, here we go. So I was looking through these various passes here, and the one thing that came to mind was this here, this translucence pass. And if we looked at the red and green, we could see that we're starting to get all the values of that to work as kind of a mat for the flames. So knowing that, let's come back to the this here and try to adjust that so that it's a little less strong in our comp. So let's go back to the comp, and what we're going to want to do is grade this down, but we're going to want to grade it down with that pass as an alpha channel. So if we come here, so if you notice here where it says mask, if you come here to translucence red here, we'll take this because that seemed to be the strongest of the 3 channels in that pass to work as a mat. We can start to bring this down and make it feel, so you can see we're getting some adjustment here. So it still feels a little, it doesn't feel quite as strong. So the next thing that we can do, which this is actually something that I've never pointed out is this button right here allows us to set an alpha channel that is different from the traditional alpha channel. There we go. So what we're going to do is actually grade that pass. So let's add a grade node, and we're going to go ahead and take that, what was it, translucence, this one here. And then what we'll do is we'll look at here, if we look at the pass, and set that as our alpha channel. So when we hit the A key, that's what we're looking at. So it's this pass right here. So when I hit the A key, you can see right away we have this translucence pass. And now we can actually gain this, well, actually add some contrast to it. So now if we gamma down and gain up a little bit, now we have a stronger pass to use as a matte. And now if we go back to our comp, we should actually have, you can see, well, it probably isn't too obvious here, but now when we actually adjust our pass, which that's right, we had set it back to 1, that's why we didn't see any difference. Now it should respond much more like what we wanted it to. So you can see right away now we have a lot more control over that flame pattern to make it blend in a little bit more and less obtrusive as it was previously. So this is, I thought this was a great opportunity to show you this little button here, which I rarely use, but this is one of those cases where it's actually quite useful. All right, so now we're starting to get more like what we want. The only thing that's bothering me now is this dark honeycomb pattern in the wings, and that is a direct result of the alpha channel being solid and then these passes taking in a dark pattern through here. So let's see here. If we look at the alpha channel and then start stepping up through our various passes here, we'll probably see it's not in here, not in the diffuse. Where is it coming through? Not in the speck. Probably in the reflection. No. Oh, it's in this refraction here. So what we need to do now is try to isolate this and maybe blend it in so that it feels more like it's more not as obtrusive. So the way we can do that is actually trying to do some math here to separate this out. If we go back to the original beauty build of the EXR and we look at the alpha channel, you'll notice we have this honeycomb pattern piped through very heavily. So what we need to do is isolate the honeycomb pattern from all these other elements that are color corrected and working. So the best way to do this is we'll just go ahead and take another shuffle node here, and we'll just take the alpha channel from all of this. So if we go here and yeah, this is what we want. And let me just view through here. So I'm going to take the alpha channel and we're going to pipe it through to all 4 channels here. And now let's also branch this off. And then there is the, we do have a diffuse raw on this EXR build, and that means that gives us the, let's see, do we have a diffuse raw? I think we do. Yes, diff raw. Here we go. So if we look at this, this gives us all the stuff that we had without that honeycomb pattern. So what we can do is take another shuffle node here, and actually while we're doing this, I'm going to go ahead and name this A so we know what we're doing. And then let's, actually I'll just copy this and paste this off to the side, and we'll name this diff raw. Okay, so if we subtract the diff raw from the alpha, so we're going to take the diff raw here and once again just set this up. There's no alpha channel, And actually, if we wanted, I suppose we could take, nah, let's not worry about that. So now, if we do a merge here, I always like to do the A over B, so that way we have control over mathematical operations with this mix slider. So if your B stream goes into it, the mix slider will essentially work the way you want it to. With that being said, the reason why I'm prefacing it that way is that what you really want to do is subtract this from this, and a lot of times people would just set this with, here, let me just demonstrate it. Actually, probably easier to explain it in this manner. So if we do it this way, you would do a minus. So if we go here and set this to a minus, where is it? Minus. Then we need to actually turn this to essentially an alpha channel like this. And we're looking through the RGBA as well, which is also not helping us. So what we need to do is actually add the three channels to make them white. So let's add an expression node here. Now, let's do, we could do R plus G plus B. Let's try that. But, oh, what happened here? Copy. And we'll put this into all three channels. Actually, all four. If we do that, now we can actually, there. Now we have something much more like what we wanted to see. So this is just the ribs and the flame pattern. And now what I was trying to show is this, where we're subtracting, we're doing a minus. But in our case, if we want to have control over the mix, the way to do it is the inverse of the minus, which is called a from. So you're actually doing a from here. So minus and from are exactly the same, the only difference being the manner in which you pipe them into the merge node here. And and actually to demonstrate that, you can see now there's no difference between these two nodes, and we're viewing the RGB. I can also see right now that what we want to do is take this and really gain this up. So let's add a grade node. Okay, and let's just do something like that. So now we're starting to get somewhere, and yeah, something like this should work. And now with a from, now we're left with this honeycomb pattern, which is exactly what we wanted to see. Perhaps this is a little bit heavy-handed on the color correction. So something like this should be sufficient. Actually, yeah, we'll leave it at that. That looks pretty good. So now what we have is this honeycomb pattern, which we could now color correct and add in to this. So if we do an add like a plus, now we're making our own pass here, which is pretty cool. So let's add another grade node to this, and maybe a plus. Okay. Branch this off, keep it all nice and neat looking. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is look at the output of everything comped over the background. So it seems that we probably need to tone this way back. Okay, so, well, first off, let's just color correct this to more of a green pattern. Actually, before we do that, let's just gain this down, or mix this down, this one here, so it's not crazy. There we go. So this is before and this is after, and of course it's flattening everything out, but this should actually work pretty well. And to be honest, what we could also do is take that color correction up so that we're getting more of the honeycomb pattern and less of the other material. So here, if we take this up a little bit, now we're isolating more of that honeycomb pattern, which is exactly what we wanted to do. So yeah, now we're affecting pretty much just that and nothing else, which is perfect. So with that being said, let's go ahead and color correct that so that it feels a little bit more green, which is what I think it was kind of looking like before. So I'm just going to go ahead and take the saturation up a little bit on this and maybe take the gain down slightly. So now this is feeling like this is blending much better. And now let's actually, before we continue much further, let's just compare from our previous Class 8 beauty build to the one we've done now. Oh, okay, well, it's pretty clear that we need to make the interior of the wings a lot more transparent. And honestly, that honeycomb pattern is pretty, it's fairly pronounced in this render as well. So now that I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and stop down one more time and just clean this up and make this replicate this build much more effectively. Okay, so this is where I've taken it from where we were before, and this is what the original beauty build that we did in Class 8 looks like. So I'd say that at this point I'm going to continue from here on out and call this good. Just wanted to give you an idea as to what I've done, and now that you've seen the difference between the two, let's go ahead and step through the various operations that I did to get there. So the first thing that I did is take the alpha channel that we had previously, and I set that to be the opacity pass. That at least gave us that was the first thing that we did that I was able to do to make it feel a lot more like the wings had some transparency. So that is pretty much what that original alpha channel was in the beauty, but after doing some experimentation, I realized that that is actually where the alpha channel we want to use for all of that. So that was the first step. Then after that, the next thing that I did is, I'll see if I can kind of go up, is adjust the refraction. So in the color correction on the refraction and the amount of that material that we were using that was simulating the reflection pass from the previous render was still just a little bit too strong. So I took this down significantly. And mind you, one of the things that I have never said that is, I think, very cool with these mix sliders on the merge nodes is if you go in close on your node graph and you see this little X above any of these merge nodes, that's an indication that you've actually adjusted the mix slider so that it's not 100%. So in the case of this one, this would be 100% mix, but in previous, in any of the other ones, you can see that's a result of the mix slider being adjusted. So it's actually a nice little notation as well. Having said that, let's continue up in my properties bin here. I actually left all this in here so I could remember the process for which I went through. Then the other thing that I was noticing is that overall everything was feeling too green compared to what the Class 8 build had. So I went through on my hue correct on the diffuse, and that's this one here, and essentially I had done a lot more color correction to bring the green out, and that was just too much. So once again, I backed off on that and adjusted these so that they were a little more neutral and had more of a bluish purple feeling to them. And then after that, here, let me take this out so I can stay. Then let's see here. Oh, after that, then I took the ribs that we had before, or not the ribs, excuse me, the honeycomb pattern that we had color corrected to make it feel like it wasn't so dark and black. Well, previously it was a lot darker than what we had added. So once again, took the mix on that plus from this pattern here. Actually, let me set this here. So this pattern here, what I decided to do is add in much less of that than we had done previously. So now we're just adding just a touch of that in there. So once again, go back here to our preview, and then moving upstream, then let's see, where am I? Oh, yes, the translucence, the thing that we were using this mat for to grade the flame pattern in the wings. Once again, we had turned that so that it was way down, and in the other render, or the other build that we did from Class 8, it was just a lot more pronounced. So once again, I brought this back up and turned it a little more green to match what we had done earlier, or in Class 8. And then moving upstream, then that was the other thing with the refraction that this pass that we had isolated to give some depth to those wings, the transparency. I also decided to color correct this so it was a little bit more purple. Before, we had it color corrected so that it was more on the greenish side, and given the fact that it was kind of a purple outlay or a purple feel from the wings, I went ahead and neutralized that much more. And then the spec, that was the other thing. The spec was very heavy in this render that we got, so essentially I just took it out. So you can see here the mix slider is set to 0, but I'm leaving it in, so if you decide that you want to adjust that and bring some value of that spec in, after I'm done here, you can do that. And then where are we here? The grade on here. So in this case, I realized we didn't have an ID mat for these ribs, and so I turned this off just to show you what I'd done. And basically I was trying to tone these way back, because in the Class 8 build that we had, they were a lot less heavy-handed. So just one more time to bring you back to this. This is what it looked like in the Class 8 build, and here we are now taking these ribs down significantly. So that, how did I get to that? Just I should actually note, I took this reflected MA pass, which had basically this rib pattern in it, and once again subtracted it from our alpha channel that we had here. So then all I was left with was these ribs, and then of course boosted it with a little color correction, and then used that as a mat to color correct those ribs so that they were a little darker. So at this point, this is where we're at, and the only thing that I want to go through from here is the process of the relight node. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So for the relight node to work effectively, what we need to do is have a normals pass and a position to points pass. So in the scanline render node from our camera and our geo, we can actually create those. So if you go over to the shader tab here, we have these output vectors. And from here, we can create a basically surface point, meaning point position pass, and a surface normal pass. So let's just go ahead and create those. They may be existing here, but just for the sake of demonstrating it, I'm going to create them from the geo and camera that we have currently. And what we're going to do is just create a new pass. So go here to new, and we'll call this position, POS. And what we're going to be doing is an X and a Y and a Z for our various channels. And then for the normals, we'll do the same thing, and we'll call this normal. And one more time, X, Y, and Z. Now we have actually created our two passes, and if you want to look at them, they're noted right here in our output. So here's our normals pass, which looks very much like a normals pass. And then here's our point position pass, which that's exactly what we want to see. So now that we've done that, we can go through the same process of shuffle copying them into our B stream here. So since you know this, I'm going to go ahead and stop and just add that. Okay, so there we are. Now we have our normals pass and point position pass added. So normal and point position. So moving along, let's go ahead and come in here. The next step we need to do is add a relight node. So we'll branch off a relight node from our pipe here that we have all the channels put into. So do a relight. And with this, now this node is a little different. And let me just talk a little bit about it. The first thing that we do, since I'm branching this off of here, it defaults to the color input, and that's exactly what you want. You want the color from your RGB channels from the beauty, or your rebuilt beauty rather, to come through. Then the next thing it's asking for, you have this other input here which is called lights. So what I'm going to do is just add a light. And this is something to note: when you do this, then you actually end up with another input after the fact on the left side of the node, which is called camera. And so obviously we know that we want our camera here. Now let me see if I can tidy this up a bit. Go here, and now lastly, when you see that we've added camera to the mix, now we have this new input called material. And for this purpose, I'm going to use a material. So if you go to shader, you have these various material options, and basically that's exactly what it is. It's asking for a shader. So we'll use the Phong just because that's simple enough, and that gives us everything we need. So now we'll just leave this as by itself. In the case of the light, what we need to do is turn this to a spotlight, because you could use a directional, but I like to work with the spotlights for relighting, because essentially we're only going to be relighting certain parts, and we don't want to do as broad of a distribution of light across the geometry, or the points rather. So take this and set this to spot. Now that we have this, let's view through the output of the node. As you can see, there is nothing, and there's a few things that need to take place. Well, for one, when you look at the properties of the relight node, we need to actually establish what is the normal and the point position passes. So let's go here, and this is going to be our normal vectors, and as soon as we do this, you can see that we're getting a change. And then here is our point position pass, which essentially nullified everything. The next step, of course, is to go ahead and look at our geometry, which here it is. We're in 3D space, and you can see right away that the light is behind it. So if we go here, let's do a top down. So from the top, if we take this behind the geo, you can see it responding very quickly. And we'll take that over here, and then we'll also move this off to, actually, you know what, let's move this closer to where the geometry is, which is right here, and move this off to the side, and now rotate it. And because what we were demonstrating is that screen left light kick that we were getting from the previous render, and now the next thing we need to do is let's go to the front, and let's go ahead and bring this up so that it's more at the same same latitude as the geometry. So here we go. And actually, to be honest, I think I might tilt this down and go for kind of a high angle kick, because that seemed to me to be more like what we had before. So now that we've done this, we should actually see a difference. So let's go ahead and step into 2D. And of course now you can see right away that we're getting some of this light kick. And I think this is kind of what we want to signify. This looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and do the next step, which is actually adding this to what we have previously. So in order to do this, let's go ahead and look at our output of the wings over the background, and let's just do a plus. And of course this is an over, or no, it is a plus, but we've gone way too much into what we want out of this. So let's see what we're getting here. And for starters, it doesn't feel like it's producing the result that I want. So actually, let's try a few things here. Let's take this back up to 100%. So what I think that we should start doing is let's bring up the intensity of the spotlight. So we start doing that, and immediately you can see we're getting more light kicks off of the ribs, which is good. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was more of a yellowish light kick that we saw in the previous build. Yeah, it's much more bronze looking. So let's see what we can do to get that. So let's go back here. And so if it's more bronze, let's take it to something more like that. And let's go ahead and bring that up. Now, right away, this is, there's a few things that we need to adjust here, but now you can start to see the value of what you get out of this relight node. Now that we have this, let's take, for one, let's take our diffuse down, because what we want is not on the actual wings themselves, but more the ribs, because that's what we were getting before. And mind you, just in case I didn't specify, we're controlling this through the Phong shader here. And then I don't know if we want to take our spec up. That might be too intense. Actually, let's take the spec down slightly. I think the other thing that I'm wanting to do here is actually take out I think there's an alpha channel in here. So here, let's take a look. Yeah, so if we take out the alpha channel, it might bring us in to looking a little bit more natural. So let's just take a shuffle and strip out the alpha channel like so. And I'll just, there we go. So we can note that properly. And now one more time, let's go back here. Yeah, so now what we can do is actually, if we go back here and step into 3D space, and actually we can view through the camera, there's a few things that we can do with the light. Oh, and another thing you can do, which I probably didn't tell you, is that you can look through the light and see what the light is, how the light is casting by looking through the light, which is actually pretty useful. I think that, well, maybe bringing this also back a little bit, and if we were to go back to the camera view and maybe, let's see, actually the only way we're going to be able to do this is if we go to the light itself and adjust the X. So, and maybe just do larger increments. There we go. So you can see as we bring the light forward towards the camera, it's showing more of the wings, the flat surfaces of the wings, but we don't want to do too much of that because mainly we're concerned with the ribs, and I suppose that's actually going to be okay. And then another thing we haven't really talked about is the cone angle. You can actually adjust the cone angle very easily with the light and get a look that's allows you to control it much more. And then there's also the cone penumbra angle, which is actually the softness, and I don't know if it represents that in 3D space. No, it doesn't seem to. So let me demonstrate that in 2D space, and actually, since we'll gain this up now, if I take the penumbra cone angle, you can see what it does is it actually softens that edge of the light itself, which this is actually pretty nice. And then the cone fall off, if we were to take this down, and actually let me set this back down to 0. So if we have our cone fall off, basically that's the kind of the value of the cone of the light. So it's the overall intensity from the center of the cone to the edge. So that's what that does. And in our case, we actually had something that looked pretty decent, so I'm just going to adjust the penumbra angle off a little bit, and I'd say that looks, I like that. And now let's go back to our comp and set our gain back to its default. And honestly, this looks pretty good. I would have to say, let's see what it looks like before we added. Yeah, this is actually giving us more or less exactly what I was hoping to see. So we're getting this screen left light kick that we had in the previous render from the CG, and now we're starting to get the same sorts of things. So I think that this is probably where I'll leave it off. With that being said, one of the things that I should also mention about the relight node, which is one final note. In our case, when we were viewing through the relight, if we go here and view through 3D space, we see the light responding to the wings perfectly. And one of the things about that is that we have geometry. But what if you were in a case where you didn't get geometry from the CG department, which is actually much more common, but you were given a point position pass and a normals pass? So with that being said, let's go ahead and see what you would get. Let me see if there's a way to illustrate that. The way we would demonstrate that to turn off the geometry is just go in here to display. If we just turn this off, then that'll disappear. So the way you would be able to view this in 3D space and actually some interactive lighting would be as if you generated a position of points pass, which basically creates a dense point cloud that allows you to then cast light on it in 3D space. So let me show you that, and that's how I'll close. So let's go ahead and get a position to points, and we'll branch this off of here. And once again, set our surface point to the point position pass and our normals to the normal pass here. And then now that we have this, the next thing we need to do is connect up, we need to view our light and our camera. So these are all 3D nodes. So the way we do this is tie these together. So I'm going to select this, the light, and then go up here and select our camera. And mind you, I'm selecting the output of the retimed camera. And then if we create a scene node, okay, now it's calculating the point cloud. Okay, so now that we have this, this is how we would be able to if we didn't have the geometry, this is how we'd be able to view the lighting interactively in 3D space by creating this dense point cloud. And basically what it's doing is it's just taking the data from the normal pass and the point position pass and creating a point cloud that essentially resembles the geometry. So with this, you can see now we can actually start to adjust this, and you can see that we actually have this interactive lighting. And this obviously isn't quite so impressive because we already started out with the geometry, but if you didn't have that, this is actually one of the most effective ways to allow you to look at your light in 3D space and adjust it correctly if you didn't have the geometry ahead of time. So I think that I made my point. So that is essentially it, and I guess this is a good place to leave off and let you folks take it from here. You know, at this point, after all of this, once you've got what you feel like are wings that are integrated nicely, then the next step would be to take this retiming that you folks did, or I don't know if you're using the ones that I did here, and apply that to your final render, and that should give you a pretty cool looking shot. And obviously there's plenty of things that you can do to take this any direction you want creatively, but I think that this gives you a pretty good handle on certainly the best way to integrate your CG and other things that you can do with it. So in closing, I just want to say that I really enjoyed teaching this class. I hope you got some value out of it, and by all means hit me up on the forums, and I will look forward to seeing you all again sometime. All right, thank you so much.